Good afternoon, everyone. Oh, come on. Hello? Thank you. I can see you. There's a lot of bright lights, but I can see there actually are a few people there, including the guy all the way in the back in the white hat. Give me a wave. There you go. Welcome to the last session slot at TechEd 2013 New Orleans. You guys have a good week? Yeah. Now, how many of you are staying tonight? And how many did you guys tell work that you're not coming in Friday, right? You still have more. Yeah. Awesome. All right, well, I will be out later tonight, so if you see me, tell me you came to the session, and maybe I'll buy you a cocktail. Welcome to Continuous Deployment with Microsoft Visual Studio. My name is Brian Randall, and I'm a partner with MCW Technologies. And if you want more about me and you want to get a hold of me, here's the email addresses, Twitter handle, blog address. Blog address I will go up, and it won't be tomorrow, it'll be Saturday. But I will put up interesting URLs related to some of the stuff I'm going to show you today. But before we go much further, what I want to do is make a quick change to my website. So right now, I have a website hosted up on Windows Azure. And I even have a team project set up for it. But if we go to the home page, you see it's right there. And so you, sir, in the white shirt, have we met before? Okay. So you'll notice that right now, under 3, it says CD update. We're going to change this text right here. So, sir, what's your name? Jason. Now, is that S-E-N or S-O-N? S-O-N, okay. So we're going to come down here, and you'll notice it says CD update. Jason, can you give me a phrase of some sort that you would like to appear here? Something polite. Where are you from? Jason says, hello from Gainesville, Florida. Go Gators. Well, hold on, Gators. All right? Is that reasonable? Okay, so Jason and I have never met. I'm going to save this. And what's going to happen here, if you take a zoom in there, I have a pending change. This is a ASP.NET MVC4 web project using the internet template. And it is currently set up and bound to a Team Foundation service project up in the cloud. Jason made a change. And if I was really OCD, well, I am, so we'll go back over here. And we're going to create a work item here real quick, because I want some traceability as to why I did this change. Jason made me do it. All right, I'm going to assign this to myself. Specifically, I'm logged on with my MCW address. And you can see I'm a little schizophrenic. I have a few addresses. So we'll save and close this. And that's going to be on my list of things to do. And what I'll do is come back over Visual Studio, go to something called My Work, which is a feature of Visual Studio 2012 Premium and above. And you can see Jason made me do it. Shows up right there. So I'm just going to drag that on there. I'm going to go to Check-in. It's going to automatically associate the work item. And I think I'm going to be done here. So I'm going to resolve this. And I'm going to check it in. And what's going to happen is that's going to kick off a continuous integration build on the service. But better yet, not only is it going to kick off that build, which we'll see right there running, it's going to then, assuming the build completes and my unit test pass, it's going to deploy it live to brian-randall.com. So if some of you want to open up your computers and go there and refresh, you can tell me when it's done. I'm going to go back to talking for a little bit, but we'll come back and check the status of this. Now, so you know who I am. Who are you? I know Jason, but we don't have time, because really if we went through everybody in the room, you guys probably wouldn't make it to the party tonight or out to Bourbon Street, and that'd be upsetting. So I imagine some of you look like this. Not exactly like that person, but you ever been on the phone call like that because the deployment hasn't gone so well? Or maybe this is how you feel when they call you, yelling at you on the phone. Or it gets worse, right? And finally, this is how you really feel about IT and technology. Yeah, let me get rid of it. Fundamentally, I'm hoping you're here because you currently have a deployment process at your organization that is not as awesome as you want to be. Anybody that way? Yeah. There you go. Okay, thank you. And the problem is, for a lot of us, you go to look at the deployment process, and it looks something like this. It's a bunch of documentation that, if you look at the spines, they've only been opened occasionally, kind of like when the book was first bought. and the instructions are kind of dusty and old, and it's one of those things where if you're on the IT pro side of the house doing the deployment, you go and do it, and then something doesn't work, you go talk to the developers, they go, oh, we changed something. Why don't you update the docs? Well, you know how, developers, docs? That's like getting developers to write check-in comments, right? And unfortunately, when people start thinking about your deployment processes in your software, it starts to smell. Fundamentally, getting to this nirvana of continuous deployment has happened because users are expecting more. The problem we have is that there's all these smells, there's all these anti-patterns when it comes to deployment. The first one is the manual deployment using docs, some kind of manual process. Now, what's really funny is I've talked to organizations, and one of the things I get as a justification for the manual process of the documentation is, well, we got a checklist. We can sign this off. This will pass an audit. And I'm thinking, okay, that's great. Yes, you have it documented. But how do you prove from the paper that you did the deployment correctly? Right? How do you know it worked out okay? Your paper says it should be okay, but how do you prove that it was okay? Another problem we have, and this is a big smell for modern development teams, is that you only deploy when development is done, right? The more traditional waterfall development and deployment style, which ultimately comes down to the fact that you're not agile enough, and agile with a little a. We're not going to do the Roman sandals here. Peter Provost does that much better than I do. But where we're not agile enough in that we don't trust our processes to where we've double-checked and triple-checked it over and over again because we know our developers are going to check in code that will not work. Right? We need to make sure it goes to a formal QA process, it's evaluated, we fix a bunch of bugs, and then we feel good enough to deploy it. But only then if we do it off hours, on a weekend, where everybody's on call in case something goes wrong, because something usually goes wrong. We're not prepared to deploy on a weekly basis or a monthly basis. So our excuse is, well, we want to be done. The problem is development's never done. And ultimately one of the problems is you take the manual configuration that starts in development because you're learning and you're trying to figure it out, all the way through the different environments that you need to deploy to where that becomes the status quo for deployment. When we look at traditional deployment options, it's usually from development and operations. Those are the two deployment sources. The problem is they're not one. And what happens is, it's traditionally development pushes to test. Test looks at it, they file bugs, we fix it, we redeploy to them, and then at some point, test moves it to staging, and then possibly maybe to user acceptance test environment. And ultimately, then, once they sign off, production picks up the bits, and then they go through and they do the production deployment. Well, one of the problems is it totally adds latency to the process of when development signs off and it goes out there. And so one of the ways we've solved this on development is we use branches, right? Because we don't want our developers in a code freeze waiting for it to get pushed out to production. And then branching is wonderful, right? Everybody loves branching, right? Anybody using TFS and branching? Yeah. And you're happy it does branching better than source safe, but you're like, merging sucks, right? Yeah. So the traditional deployment game is not working. Just like in the days where working without source control wasn't working, we moved forward and our users expect more. We expect more. We like having our weekends. In the old days, you're on the pager. Now they have cell phones. They track you down. What you want to do is you want to get off work at a reasonable hour, 5, 6 o'clock. You want to go home and live with your family, do your thing. Right? Weekend comes, you want to unwind. Right? I mean, come on, Jason, right? Football season's about to start. Okay? Yes, sir. All the way in the back. I'm sorry? Page updated? Oh, fantastic. So just to prove that point, refresh. Jason says, hello from Gainesville, Florida, go Gators. That's pretty slick, isn't it? That's pretty darn awesome, right? I just deployed to the internet magically. I love that. And I can do it again. I'll do it again later. Now, thank you, sir. What do you want? You want 3 things. You want a consistent, repeatable, automated deployment story. That is the goal of every modern software development team. So what am I going to talk about? We're first going to talk about the philosophy of continuous deployment. ultimately, when we think about getting to continuous deployment, a lot of organizations, and maybe some of you, have come here looking for that retirement package. In other words, a lot of people, my grandfather, for example, got married, was in the Air Force, retired from the Air Force, got a regular job, worked a certain number of years, made some savings himself, had his pension, and retired. And then as things have evolved, this new technology, kids come out of school and they think they want these big package deals. They see these great things at places like Google and Microsoft. They have these packages, all these benefits. And they're looking to retire at 40. They kind of want to skip the work that it takes to get to retirement. And they fantasize of being, the next Facebook CEO. And maybe there's one or two in the audience that can do continuous deployment today without paying attention to the philosophy section. So if you believe you're that way, take a nap. I'll wake you up in just a little bit, and I'll show you some mechanics. For the rest of you, I don't believe you're probably ready for continuous deployment because you haven't put in the effort in advance that it takes to get there. But we'll see. Now, my children loved Sesame Street when they were little. My son now he'd cringe at that. And Daddy, I play Halo, and he's almost 10, so I got to be careful here. But my daughter's still young enough, if I could say this, that this section is brought to you by a letter, the letter C. The letter C is simple. Continuous. Continuous deployment is only achieved when you focus on the flow to get to it. Continuous deployment is the second to last stop on a nirvana location. But you can't jump to the end until you've taken the path. And it starts with continuous integration. Continuous integration is the process of where when I check in code into my version control repository, and to be clear, this whole section, you don't have to use the tools I'm going to use. You can use any version control product you want. You can use any build tool you want as long as it supports this. And the idea of continuous integration is I check in some code. And what happens is my code is taken automatically from the version control repository, and it is built. And the key thing, it's built with my changes as well as everybody else's changes that were put in before me. It's a sanity check to make sure that what I have done works with everybody else's code. Now, the good news with a lot of modern development styles and languages, whether you're building just websites with ASP.NET and JavaScript or Ruby, PHP, I don't care. But the world's gotten better. We are getting better on this process. In the old days, integration happened down the path because we often built these monolithic components that didn't have to talk to each other right away. The days have kind of changed on that. It's really hard to build an interesting app without integrating a little earlier. But the point of continuous integration is integrate early, integrate often. How often? Every check-in. Now, you want these builds to be fast. You want them to be efficient. But you also want them to do more than just compile. That's just one piece of a process Martin Woodward and I like to call Kava. We were in Barcelona once, and let's just say we were enjoying the city a lot, and they have a great drink called Kava. And so we had to apply it to our talk. And the idea that Kava, C-A-V-A, is that a build is going to first collect the assets necessary for your application. And this whole orchestration process is then wrapped around the idea that, yes, at some point you're going to assemble, you're going to compile the source code and create something. You're going to then V-validate it to make sure that it meets some baseline level of sanity that says this is good. And one way we do that is with unit tests. Unit tests that are fast, efficient, and test the application in chunks. And then finally, we're going to audit and sign off, and then we can do a deployment. Now, the thing, though, is just continuous integration only does you so much. The next step is this notion of continuous testing. Now, it starts with the developer. For some developers, test is a four-letter word. That is a bad word, right? It's funny, developers have their own, 7 bad words that you can't say, and test is one of them. Don't look at unit testing as a test mechanism, as a quality assurance thing. Look at it as a diagnostic tool that helps you debug problems, and you go a lot further with it. Now, if you're working in a more agile mechanism like Scrum, the idea of a tester is verboten. Everybody who's working on a Scrum team is a team member. You are focused on the same goal, which is shipping a valuable unit of work for your customer. You're always focused on delivering value. And so you don't blur the line to say that, well, I only write code. No, you check for correctness. You check to make sure that what you're building is what your users want. So the idea that we wait till a certain interval to hand off code to another department, another group to test is sad, really. Because what we want is that immediate continuous feedback that what we're building is correct. Correct from function and correct from desire. Because our goal is to be wish makers. Users come to us with wishes. Those wishes are put on our backlog, our requirements list, and it's our job to make them happy. It's our job to play Santa Claus. And the only way we can do that is if we do it effectively, because let's be honest, would your users be happy if you only gave them presents once a year? Gentlemen, some of you are married, I assume, yes? Is your wife happy to only get affection once a year in the form of roses, candy, a nice dinner out? No. I can tell you from experience, right? Ladies, would you like to be told you're lovely once a year? Twice a year? Of course not. And no, that does not make your back end look big. I learned that's always the right answer. So we must test all the time. Now there's this thing called continuous delivery. Great. We're going to dig into that more. And there's this idea of continuously improving, because it's never perfect the first time out. We want to continually improve our processes around what we're doing before. And if we make all this happen, then we've reached nirvana, continuous value. The only reason they keep us around in organizations is because we help make the company better. And if your company is selling a product, software solution, well, you better believe continuous value is getting new features out there that solve customer needs and make your users happy, and get them to continue to charge on their credit card and write that check. Now, when we look at modern deployment in contrast to traditional deployment, we want to think of deployment as a pipeline. Something that is a continuous flow, not a set of staged locations. Now, it is true you will still have environments. We're not saying that there's only one environment. No. I didn't do it. What we're saying is that we want a flow that goes from the check-in point all the way to production in a seamless fashion. We want to eliminate human intervention. The idea of the pipeline is that we're going to have these progressive stages. And at every stage as we move through the pipeline, we're getting continuous feedback, there's that C word again, from the stakeholders at that point in the pipeline. So for example, I'm not expecting you to all do Scrum or even to do Agile. What I am expecting is when you hit a certain point of delivery, that you get quick, efficient feedback. There's nothing worse for developers to ship some code and then have someone get back to them 2 weeks later to tell them whether it's good or not. There's a great video on the internet done by some guys out of Europe, and all you have to do is go to YouTube and search for, I want to run an Agile project. And one of the things that happens towards the end is that the developer's done all these great things to make Agile and Scrum happen for them. Ship something, and the guy says, oh, that's great, I'll look at it later. So you have to set your organization up for that change to where they will give you that feedback. And in a modern deployment scenario, particularly when you're going to hit nirvana of continuous deployment, you need to support some kind of rollback or roll forward mechanism. A term that's been bandied about the industry and that's really hot right now is big data, but that's not what we're going to talk about. Another one, though, for us as developers is DevOps. Fundamental idea behind DevOps is to break down the barrier between development and IT so it is one unit of flow. The idea that we do not throw code over the wall to operations and then they deploy it. We want to create a relationship where we can easily move code in an automated fashion to a production scenario and have it monitored and get that feedback whenever there's an issue. But we have to be able to support the something went wrong scenario. Because that's going to be operations number one pushback when you try and do a continuous deployment setup. They're going to say, well, what are we going to do when something goes wrong? How are we going to fix it? Because you guys throw a bunch of stuff over the wall at us. One of the organizations that's credited with the modern DevOps concept is the folks at Flickr, prior to when they were bought by Yahoo. And Flickr, when they did a talk at an O'Reilly conference, discussed what they did is they discussed the fact that when you're on the internet and doing an internet scale property, you can't effectively create a test environment. It's too expensive. You can't duplicate the internet. It's really hard to duplicate the behavior of users on the internet. So there's no better place than production to test. So it required a lot of changes, which I'll talk about in just a little bit. But fundamentally, their whole solution when something went wrong is you push another update out. It's a continuous process of rolling forward and never going back. But now you can start to think about if you're pushing updates continuously up to the public internet, what you push up had better have a high chance of success, right? Because the idea of taking down your public-facing internet property for 5 minutes, half hour, hours, gets you in the headlines for people doing it wrong. And I don't know, you guys like being employed? I like getting a paycheck. That's a pretty awesome thing. Makes my banker happy. Consistent, repeatable, automated. Now, this is what we want. You're saying, Brian, we're willing to be continuous. We love it. We got continuous integration. Yeah, we'll talk about that testing thing, but we're ready to go. Okay. But there's another thing we got to talk about. And this is brought to us by the letter M. Maturity. Maturity is understanding your readiness to accept the challenges it will take. Can you be fully committed to this type of lifestyle? The first thing you have to understand is what is the maturity of your organization, and can you be an agent of change? If you're coming from development saying we want to be able to do deployments 5, 10, 20 times a day, you're going to have buy-off, right? Particularly if you have properties on the internet. You have websites. You have internal websites that control your purchasing ability, your ability to ship things to customers, your ability for the business to run. And if those things aren't available, that can cost the company lots of money. So you're going to have executive buy-in. But your team has to be committed to it, because now you're going to be held to a higher standard that when you check something in, it better be really good. You know, when we teach teams about continuous integration, we like to have a little fun with it, and usually there's some kind of game that occurs when you break the build. First, we'd like to make it embarrassing, so we'd like to hook up monitors to the build process, and sirens work well. Martin Woodward did a great thing. He made Brian the build bunny, and this build bunny would talk to you when you broke it. The thing is, when you break the build, you're then responsible for some type of bonding exercise between you and your team members, right? Donuts, beer, whatever. But when you're talking about the fact you broke the build, okay, and now instead of breaking the build, you break deployment, yeah, that's a bigger risk. Yeah, you lose, you're fired, thank you very much for playing. And ultimately, what is the maturity of your customer? Believe it or not all customers want an update all the time. This is my phone from this morning. I updated this morning just to check, and I didn't update. I had 4 updates on my phone, on my Windows phone. A lot of consumers are used to this, and when it works, right, when the new app works, they're happy to get it. When it doesn't work, they're obviously very unhappy. A majority of your users are getting used to this notion, but at the business level, not always. How many of you are on Visual Studio 2012? How many of you as a developer, if you're a developer, like the fact that they have rolled out 2 full updates in 6 months? How many of you find the churn a little wearisome? You're a little tired, right? And then if we were to ask your IT pros, your organizations, how often they like the updates, it's not so much, right? How many of you are just on Windows 7, by the way? Just doing your Windows 7 rollouts? Yeah, right? So not everybody's ready. So before you try and do this, think about your organization, think about your team, but understand your customer. Can they handle it? It doesn't mean you don't do it. It just means you don't do it as often. But you do all the things in that C section to get you there. Now, you understand what you need to do. You understand you need some maturity. So what does your development environment need to look like? How are you going to support this kind of setup? It starts with version control. And when we think about starting with version control, you have to think about, are you going to do a single code line or multiples? Now, the idea of a code line, a branch, is that this is where people check in, this is where we do our work. The idea of multiple code lines and branching is because, number one, we want to avoid code freeze. We want to avoid having to stop developers from checking in code because we want stability to verify that what we have built is ready to be deployed. In most organizations, at a minimum, you're working with at least 2 types of branches, a development branch and some kind of main QA branch. Possibly you have additional release branches, or if you're more exotic, you've got feature crews and feature branches. You might have spike branches. Some teams even have branches dedicated to individual users. And a lot of this will depend on your version control tool. In the last couple of years, the thinking of people building software at very mature levels is that branches are bad. And let me be clear. Branches are bad from attaining the goal of continuous deployment. Doesn't mean you won't use branches. In fact, you actually start to look at branches a different way in continuous deployment, which is we want to make sure that every check-in is of a high enough quality that when it goes in and it passes the build, it could be deployed. Could be. Whether you do a deployment, once again, depends on maturity. And then the idea is that if you do want to stabilize and get extra sign-off, you will branch at a point for a release branch, and that's just to stabilize, make sure, and then keep going. But it's the reverse of what we are traditionally doing, which is setting up a dev branch, which may be chaotic. A dev branch that sometimes doesn't build. Will anybody be honest and say that's the kind of dev branch you have? Does anybody have a dev branch that isn't guaranteed to always build? Yeah. But that's acceptable because it's the dev branch. The point is when you merge from dev into some kind of integration branch or a QA branch, it has to build, right? Exactly. So what we're saying instead is, let's take away the safety net that developers use, which is, I can get away with this because I'm going on vacation. I'm just going to check this stuff in. I'm going to say I'm done, and I'll plead guilty when I get back that, yeah, my code wasn't perfect. I'm sorry. Right? So this is a maturity thing. I'm not saying you have to do this, but it changes the game. To have everybody checking into main. Main always builds, and it's always good enough to ship. And TFS obviously has this, but you can use get, subversion, I don't care. But you need to do this. You're going to need work tracking. TFS has built-in work item tracking, but there's other great products out there you can use. The key is you have to be able to associate and be able to track each check-in with a purpose. Why did we change this code? What does it go to? And we don't want to track it only from a developer's comments. We want to track back to some requirement, some product backlog item, some user story that requested that change. Nothing worse than cowboy coders when you're trying to hit nirvana. Oh man, that code looks funky. I'm going to just go make changes to that. True story. Worked with a developer in the late 80s. We were doing COBOL. And the guy was a really good programmer. The problem was he also considered himself an artist. He weaved the code. And so anytime he went in to do a feature and then had to go and get some copybook or some other library, and he'd pull it in, he would rewrite things. It would drive us crazy. And my boss got ticked off and goes, what are you doing? He goes, well, it's better. Yes, it's better, but that's not the point. And the problem was this developer was on salary. So my boss basically fired him, and they rehired him as a contractor. And he said, this is what you can make based upon you getting things done. You can change anything the way you want, or you can actually start doing what I've asked you to do, and you'll be able to make your salary again. We need to be knowing what went in, why it went in, and then have that traceability that if something does go wrong, to know what part of the system it affected, because sometimes something goes wrong, and you're not sure where the problem occurred. It's one thing to know the code, but also how did it affect a larger part of the system? Did you make an update to the code because it's supposed to make something related to purchasing better? Is it supposed to relate to the authentication mechanism we use to talk to our third party? Whatever it is, you want some business traceability as well as technical traceability. Tests across the board. You want a mix of them, right? Steve McConnell in his book talks about the percentage of bugs that are found in code that's only tested one way. And it's huge. It's like 85%. Right? The minute you add a second type of test coverage, your bug rates go down. You want automated unit tests. You would like automated regression tests, particularly for testing user experience code. And you, of course, want manual tests. Humans are great testers. They do things we don't think they'll do. I wrote some code, one of my first things I was showing my boss, and he comes over, and the first thing he starts doing is starts double-clicking on things, on the buttons. I'm like, you click buttons once. He goes, no, I like to double-click them. Cause a little re-entry. Yeah, it's nice. Yeah. Found a few bugs that way. You know, testing SQL injection is always fun. You know, always for your last name, put in O'Malley, O'Reilly, something. Yeah, someone got some bad quotes. And you need builds. Builds bring it all together. Builds let you take the pulse of your team and let you know, are we ready to ship? So you get your environment ready to go, but what about the code? What about your product? What about what you're building? What are the things you have to consider? Obviously, you have to write good code. That's another session. The first biggest problem you have to deal with that people screw up with is they don't immediately deal with the concept of different configurations. Development, test, UAT, staging, production. Right? And config files are the bane of developers. Right? Microsoft made it easy. I'll just put in a config file. That's great. And then what happens is you've got a config file sitting that's pointing to your local SQL Express database. So whenever you do that, you have to figure out how to fix that. You have no excuse. It's easy today. ASP.NET Web projects support transforms. They will transform and change the configuration of a web config file based upon your build configuration. The notion of debug and release doesn't cut anymore. We need the matching types of builds for environments. And you go, well, Brian, we have Click Once apps. Great. You can use something called Slow Cheetah. Slow Cheetah is built by some guys at Microsoft. It's a free add-on. It'll do transforms for other types of projects in Visual Studio that support config files, and it works great. I have 2 customers using it. If you can, though, think about moving a lot of these settings out of config files where it makes sense. Use an alternative configuration strategy. There's a lot of different ones out there, but you want something that's a little easier to maintain other than having someone have to go in and change it with a text editor. There's some benefit to that, but there's also some danger to that. Data. I get this a lot particularly related to databases. Well, I need to have a certain database, so we have to have a shared database server. No, you don't. You might need certain test configurations, particularly for certain types of load tests where you want a lot of data. What you really need is enough data that matches the shape of your production data. If you're on Visual Studio 2010, you still have the Data Dude projects that support data generation. If you're on 2012, unfortunately, the SSDT projects don't have it. Redgate has a great product. Not expensive. And you can have repeatable data generation of sample data that matches the shape of your data but doesn't have any customer identifiable data, stuff that gets you in trouble with customers or causes trouble with the business. Right? You ever run into a developer that went up to the production database and used something like Access to copy down a bunch of data and then uses it for test? Real data? Yeah. It gets you in a lot of trouble, right? SEC, HIPAA, other regulatory issues. Yeah. Okay. Code signing. Particularly important if you're doing things in the mobile space, right? We have to have this process where we can present to our customers that our code is trustworthy. This should be something that's built in and automated and should work in every environment. There's no excuse that, well, it's just development, so I'm not going to have it code signed, right? Now, there's the anti-pattern that argues that says, well, if it's not code signed, then we know we not trust it. Yeah, but it's still coming out of your organization, okay? Got to be careful with that one. And version numbers. You need to be able to identify what is being tested, what's being used to trace it back, right? I'm sure if we looked at a lot of people's code, we'll go to the assembly version, we'll find it's 1.0.0.0, right? Because no one cares anymore. Now, when you think about your production environment, this is where it gets really hard. This goes back to that organizational buy-in. Does it support no downtime? Any of you guys have an iPhone? Anybody ever notice that Apple takes down the entire store for half hour, hours at a time? Apple takes down their store that you buy stuff online. Whenever they're announcing a new product, it'll happen next week at WWDC. They'll take the store down. We're getting ready for a new thing. Well, what kind of design is that on the back end, right? I should have to change one bit and flip it, and all of a sudden it's live. They take the entire thing down. If you're some kind of public-facing website and that's what you do, you're losing money. There's a website that remained nameless, and I respect that they do take time off, but they shut down their process for days on end during certain holiday periods. That means that if I need something, I have to go to another company. Is that something you're willing to do? And do you want it happening because it's of the deployment team, not because of business decisions? I don't want that. Do you support staggered releases? What I mean by this is going back to Flickr. What Flickr would do is they'd push out an update. And what they would do is they'd push it out to only some of their users. They could turn it on for just a subset and get feedback. Sometimes they did it randomly, right? And you would see different things. They would take the feedback. Other times it was for a specific set of users. They're pro users, for example. What do you guys think? I'm lucky as an ALM MVP that I get access to new features in Team Foundation Service. The features that Brian Harry showed on Monday and then turned on, the team room, enterprise features, I've been using those for about 3 weeks. And that's because the architecture of Team Foundation Service supports turning on features on an account-by-account basis. And do you support A/B testing of your production release? It's one thing to push it out there, but the question is, do you know if one mechanism was better than another? How do you measure the results of your deployment? What proves that it was good, besides no one's calling you on the phone and yelling at you? What's your monitoring and auditing mechanism? How do you measure? And so ultimately, when we start thinking about retooling our process for how we do things, it means rethinking how you set up your application architecture and your production environment. And the modern thinking is this notion of what we call feature flags. And the benefit of feature flags is that you define a new thing that you're putting into an application. Now, the first thing you do is architect it in such a way so that features of the application only come online when you want them to. This allows you to have developers write code and check it in and put it into the system and have it lay dormant until you're ready. I mean, how many times have you had a developer say, hey, I finished all the data access code, but Fred over here isn't done with the UI? Well, don't check it in because, it's not ready. No, check it in. You've done your code. You have unit tests to make sure that your code is correct as a unit. When Fred gets his stuff in there, then we'll do some more integration testing. And then we'll do some user acceptance testing. And we'll do that in production. We'll do that for real. And then we'll measure it with A/B testing. And then when it's good enough, we'll flip the feature on for everybody. And that's exactly what TF Service does. That's exactly what Flickr did. Continuous process. Now, understand, there's no silver bullet. I cannot tell you that if you use the tools I'm using, you'll be able to do this, because it relies so much on the human nature part of it. But if you buy into those concepts, you can do it. So how are we going to do it? Well, I promise you, only summary slides now. So I'm curious, how many of you actually read the abstract versus just the title? Okay. So if you read my abstract, I promised 4 specific deployment targets. The first one I already did, but I'm going to go through how I did it. And that was, I took an ASP.NET website, made a change to it. The source code and the build process and all my tools are up in the cloud in Team Foundation Service, and I deployed it to a Windows Azure website. That's one. So I'm going to talk about that first. Number 2, I'm going to take an ASP.NET website, and I'm going to deploy it from build to a local IS server. So local TFS, local IS running on a domain I have here on this other machine. The third one is to take an ASP.NET website and deploy it to Windows Azure from a local TFS installation. And the fourth one was to build something in Office 365 and deploy it. All without human intervention. I got plenty of time to make this happen. All right, so let's break things down. Step 1 in this case was brianrandall.com. So I needed an ASP.NET MVC website. So I created one, and I checked it into version control. As I mentioned, my version control repository is up in the cloud at Team Foundation Service. So my account is brianr.visualstudio.com. I created a team project called Web, and I checked in my code. Because I'm a little OCD, even though I'm just doing this for demo, I did work items. I tracked the work I was doing on here. Okay? And let's see, did I update? Jason made me do it. Just click the link. That should go to the done. Great. Now, add pros and art. Unfortunately, I'm not an artiste, and I wasn't able to get any pretty stuff on the web page. So it's kind of ugly, as you guys noticed. But that's okay. It'll be better in a couple weeks if you want to come back and check it. So I tracked my work. And then I needed to build. Now, this is the great thing about doing it with Azure, is that Microsoft is showing you where they're going with this. Some of the stuff today is not ready for a big production website yet, okay? But for smaller websites and things hosted in Azure, and be clear, I'm talking about the continuous deployment stuff, not Azure itself. With Azure websites, I can have a whole thing set up in a few seconds. So what I'm going to do is going to show you how I did it, and based on my time, I'll come back and I'll build one from scratch. But the idea is that I went over to Windows Azure, and you get yourself a Windows Azure account. When you get an account, you can come over here to the website section. Now, Azure has 2 mechanisms for you to host a website. They have Azure websites, and then they have Azure web roles. I use the websites, and the cool thing is, if you don't want a custom domain, you can do it for free. Okay? If you want a custom domain like mine, brian-randall.com, you have to move up to the shared, which is $9.95 a month roughly, plus egress data out. And to be honest, I mean, you have to have a lot of data because you get a gig for free. That's outbound data. Inbound data is all free. Okay? If you want SSL and you want a bunch of other stuff, then it gets a little more expensive. It's about $50 a month. So this is running at a $9.95 roughly a month site. So you come in here, and what you're able to do is you just create a new website. And when you create it, you'll see they give you all this stuff up here, which talks about tools and publishing and integrating. And so what happens is you come over here to deployments, and you can see that when I set this up, it decided not to show me anything. How nice. Go to dashboard. There we go. Okay. So there's my dashboard of the stuff, and then when a deployment happens, oh, wait, we're getting, failed to connect to TFS repository. Okay. Well, you guys get to learn more about it than I wanted to show you right this second. Okay. So here's what has happened. Note I have to make sure by law, see a little preview? They're not 100% done. So what has happened is it has lost my connection. So I'm going to fix that right now. And the way I do it is I disconnect. And then, if you're starting from scratch, you click the Setup Deployment from Source Control. When you do this, notice all the different repository mechanisms you can use. You can use Team Foundation Service. You can use Git, that's local. You can use GitHub. You can use Dropbox. That's kind of cool. You can do all your development out of Dropbox. Woohoo! Dropbox actually has a pack rat feature, so it kind of does have version control. You can do Bitbucket, Codeplex, or even an external repository using Git. So lots of flexible options. Mine's in Team Foundation Service, so I got to pick that. And then I have to specify where. So this is at brianr.visualstudio.com. I'm going to authorize. And I have to accept. And the account that you're doing this with has to have project administrator rights to at least a team project over there. I pick my team project, which in this case is the web team project. Click accept, and what it's doing, it's linking it back up. And what's going to do is it's going to find that I already have a build set up and everything configured. It's going to reset it like that. And you see I've done 4 different deployments, and there's my most recent active deployment. And here's one of the great things about this deployment setup. Notice I had built in roll back and rolled forward here. If I find out the deployment I just did, no offense, Jason, wasn't good. Maybe I spelled it wrong, right? I called you my brother's name, J-S-S-E-N. That's why I asked. We could roll it back. I just click the button and tell it, hey, I want to go back. And if you look down at the bottom part of the screen, there's a redeploy button. Okay? That's pretty darn slick. Whoa, sorry about that. Now, you can come in here and monitor the usage of your server. You can see what's been going on the last 24 hours. You can come down and say absolute time, so that we've been doing this. You can look at all the different data going through. You then have additional items for configuring what version of the .NET framework you want to support. So they support 3.5 and 4.5. You can set up SSL. You can see my domain names that are set up. And if you want SSL and even monitoring, well, they'll monitor your website. And if it goes down, you'll get an alert and email. So all this is built into Windows Azure websites. By creating that configure part, what it would have done the first time is it would have come over to Team Foundation Service, and it created a build. Now, if we look at Team Explorer and go to this build, you'll see it basically created a build with the name of my website _CD for continuous deployment. You can change this if you want. You can rename if you don't like the name. And in fact, one of these you can do, if you don't trust yourself right away, you can do continuous integration builds that will build and then have a separate build that you use for deployment that you kick off manually if you don't trust yourself initially. Okay? But I trust myself to make simple text changes. Now, the key is then how does this work? Well, they set it up all for you. And by the way, there's a big misunderstanding about this configuration. A lot of people think that I have to have one team project per website. No. You can have a team project with multiple websites bound in here with multiple builds. It's just a little extra configuration. So you do it once and then just do a little copy and pasting. So this is a standard build definition template. And what happens, though, is if you look at the process, they've changed it to an Azure Continuous Deployment XAML template. And that supports publishing your solution to your cloud service. And then you'll notice there's all sorts of settings you can use here if you go beyond the basics. So you can even deploy, yes, databases at the same time. All right? The whole idea here is to take the standard configuration for build that works both on-premises, on cloud, and just extend it via the standard extension mechanism. Okay? Everything you know about defining builds is the same. You can come over here and control the retention policy. You can control the build defaults, what you want to do with the build output. You set up your workspace just like you would on premises, and you're good to go. So literally that previous page when I was in Azure and I had to reconnect, when I did that the first time, it created the build for me, bound it up, and all I had to do was execute it and deploy my website. And as you saw earlier, when I did the call with Jason, I was able to create a new, make a change, and redeploy. So that's how you do Team Foundation Server to Azure. And you're like, okay, great, Brian, but we're not doing Azure. We don't care about the cloud, but I have internal websites. Great. So what I have here is Visual Studio 2012 Update 2 with Team Foundation Server Update 2. So I'm running the latest. But just so you know, you can do everything I'm showing you here with 2010 if you want. In fact, I'm going to show you something different customer if we have time. Now, what we have here then is another website. This time, though, I chose the intranet template. Okay? And I have the unit test, like I should. And if I open this up and go to the index, you'll see that this is on the local update path. So completely different environment. And to prove the point, you, sir, right next to Jason. What's your name? Yeah, you. Black shirt. Beto? B-E-T-O? Is that good? I don't want to butcher your name. Okay, great. Beto says hello from, where are you from, sir? San Antonio, Texas. I'm sorry? Go Spurs, all right. Oh, really? Uh-oh. All right. So, made my change, and that, of course, created a pending change. Now, the difference here is this is going to be local, but I still have a build. And you notice I have two here, one for Azure, one for my local internet. So let's go look at the build definition. Actually, let's do my check and we'll get it running, and then I'll show you the build definition while we wait. So let's go over here, pending changes. Updated with audience feedback. And we'll check it in, save it. Now, this is set up as a continuous integration build, so what we should see is there's build 19 triggered. If we double click on it, we can see the last time I ran it, based upon that bar, it took about 11 seconds. So this is going to be really quick. How does it work? Well, it's really straightforward. I'm using the standard built-in template. I did no customization to the template. Okay? What I did do, though, is under advanced, I told it to deploy on build, and I passed it a publish profile. You create a publish profile by right-clicking on your website and walking through the wizard. Okay? And so we'll come over here while this is running, go to Solution Explorer, go over here to Publish, and you can see there's the profile. And if you go up here, you can control how you want to do it. I'm doing a file system deployment, but you can do web deploy, you can do FTP. Go to Settings, you can make adjustments to delete. I don't have a database to deploy, so I'm just using that. But if I was doing the database, I'd use a web deploy instead, and that supports deploying a database to SQL Server. In either case, I save that, check that in, the build's able to find it, and if we go over here to Team Explorer, we see that my build is done. It took a little longer, it took 27 seconds. And if I go to my production server, which is on another machine, MDE08 prod, website's going to refresh. And I'm running a bunch of VMs, so it's kind of like I'm waking up. And there you go. Okay? There's the update. Beto says hello from San Antonio. Well, I'm sorry, San Antonio. Well, hey, I have a bug. Let's fix it real quick, and I'll go come back and check it. I didn't update my unit test. Oh, wow, geez. I got a bunch of English majors in the audience and above. No, this is just HTML. There's no problem there. All right, you guys. Oh, gee. Anybody want to come work with me? You guys can be my spell check. You guys are awesome. Yeah, hey, there you go. Exactly. All right, we'll check this in and we'll come back to that. So that was deploying locally. Now, the next one is, what if I want to deploy my internet site from my local Team Foundation server, my local build server, but up to Windows Azure? Well, it turns out it can be very similar. So we'll start up. Actually, we'll just leave this running because that's running the server. Let's open up my other solution. Same type of setup here. Same kind of configuration. Now, this is on a different account than my Brian Randall one. But we'll go to the home page. And you'll see I was having fun here earlier, making sure this works. So let's see. You, sir, right there. Yep. What's your name? Rut? Brett. Two T's? And where are you from? Boise, Idaho. Wow, I have relatives there. So what are you going to go, Broncos? He's like, no way. Go what? Vandals. All right. Now, this website, to be clear, let's go over here, is up here. stt.azure. So let's bring up this website. So this one is one of the free ones. Notice it says .azurewebsites.net. So you can see right now it says have fun, CD updates are fun. When it's done, we'll see Brett's comment. So let's go back over here to build. We're going to check in this change. We'll check it in. Go back over to builds, and first of all, we should see that our previous build is green. So we'll go look at Beto. But right now, there's the Azure one running. So let's go over here to my local homepage, refresh, and it looks correct. So continuous deployment. I didn't have to do anything but update the code, and it got pushed all the way through. Now we go back over to Visual Studio. We got this other build running. It's done. That one took 20 seconds to update, push up to Azure. And now we'll refresh the page here. And there you go. Hello from Boise, Idaho. Go Vandals. So now we're able to deploy to Azure. Now what's the difference here? So with Azure Websites, one of the things it does for you, and that's Brian Rand. Let me switch to the other one. Here we go, ST. You have the same dashboard, and one of the things you have here is the ability to download a published profile. This published profile is an XML file that contains information on how to publish to Azure both via web deploy, which is what I used, or you can deploy through FTP. Now, you got to be careful with this file because it has your username and password string in there, and you're going to need this. And there's ways to be more secure than what I'm showing you here if you don't want to store it in the build. Depends on the organization. Basically, you can register the certificate and store it in the local security store. I didn't do that. I'm going to show you the switches, but just so you know, you can be more secure than what I'm doing here. Now, what I did is I downloaded that onto the build machine, and then I went into the build configuration, go to process, whoops, zoom out. And you'll notice deploy on build is true, the profile, and so what happens is that publish profile dialog you go into, you just import what you download, go through it, and it saves the data out. Then you can specify allow untrusted certificate for what I'm doing here. You can use only trusted certificates if you want. And then it's username and password. And it goes from my secure local build server, pushes it up to the cloud. Okay? This published profile supports deploying databases also to either the hosted environment, or you can do updates to SQL Azure if you want to. Okay? Now, the last thing I want to show you, and then we'll come back based upon time, is that you can even do this now for Office 365. So Office 365, of course, is Microsoft's Office in the cloud. And I have to say, we really like it. I use it. I know a lot of customers doing it. Microsoft had some really big wins, selling like 200,000 seats. So a lot of organizations are doing this. And by doing this, they're saying, we don't want to run SharePoint on premises. We don't want to have the headache of running the servers. But we want all the SharePoint goodness, and we still want to build custom SharePoint solutions. So SharePoint 2013 supports this whole new app model. They support old school SharePoint 2010 style solutions, what are known as farm solutions. And you can still do sandbox solutions. But they also have something called the app model. And the app model introduces a different way to build your SharePoint front ends, in particular, where you can have an Azure front end for the website, but you use SharePoint service on the back end. On the other hand, a lot of organizations say, we like the basic SharePoint experience. We like the notion of document libraries. We like lists. And we're happy with that. But we occasionally want custom web parts, custom SharePoint apps. So the Microsoft team that was responsible for these tools said, we've got to make it easier for people to build SharePoint solutions. And they've been doing a lot of good stuff with the tooling. But someone from the ALL team, a guy named Sam Guggenheimer, went over to a gentleman named Sean Labrie, who is the guy in charge of the dev team for these tools. And they said, you know what would be really great is if I could do continuous deployment for these new SharePoint apps and these Office apps as easy as I can do it for regular websites. So these folks went off and they did it for you, and it is that easy, folks. So here's what happens. I've got a Visual Studio solution. And what I did was I came in here and said File, New, Project. And notice the node. Now, to be clear, if you don't have it this way, you don't have the latest tools. You need the tools that release at the end of the year. The easiest way to get them is to run the web platform installer, but you can download them manually if you want to do multiple deployments. You pop on the web platform installer and search for SharePoint, and you want the Microsoft Office developer tools from 2/26, 2013, or the latest, if there's newer ones. When you install these tools into Visual Studio, you'll end up with these extra templates. Now, you get all the regular SharePoint solutions. You get Office add-ons if you're used to building Visto add-ins. Whoa. Okay, you can still do those. But you get the new apps. So I picked App for SharePoint. Let it get set up. And now to build these type of apps, you need an Office developer account. There's 3 ways you can get one. One, you have an Office 365 account with SharePoint, the appropriate level, and I think you need an E1 or 2 or something. Uh-oh. Come on, I've only got 13 minutes, folks. We can get through this. My laptop can then do what it wants to do. You need a paid account, and you can set one of them for your organization. You can have developer collections and stuff. If you have MSDN, if you're an MSDN subscriber, you get a free Office developer account with your subscription based upon the level you have and all that stuff. And third, you can give Microsoft, I think it's $100 a year, and you can get a developer account. Okay? And this pays for your online access and storage and all that stuff to do development. But you can also just sign up for 30 days to try it for free. So I went and signed up an account, so you need to do that, and you have to have the URL set up to do that. Once you've done that, that gets bound here to your web part. And so you'll see mine's bound down here to deploy to SharePoint. And if we come over here to the default.aspx page, I put some text in. We're going to change this section, but you'll notice I say thanks to Sean and his team. They did a really great job. So that's step 1. You got to build the app. Step 2, you want to check it in. Now, the cool thing is the team supports on-premises with Team Foundation Server and build, so just like I just did the last demo I did, or like my first demo, they support Team Foundation Service. So that's the one I chose to do because it was just a little less work on the build side. Now, what you need is to go to this website regardless. Okay? OfficeSharePointCI.coplex.com. I'll put the URL on my blog. You can search for it. You can ping me if you can't find it. But in the download section, they have some downloads that you need. And what you need to do is download one of these drops. And basically, you want the top one for Team Foundation Service. And you download that puppy dog. And then you go and check it into version control. And if we go over here to code, what this ends up giving you is a XAML configuration file as well as some PowerShell scripts. This parameters.ps1 script you update with information about your environment. If you have more than one environment, then of course you duplicate the file. Okay? You're going to reference this from your build configuration. They then give you a build process template called Office Tools App template.xaml. So you check that in. So you download a zip, check in a couple files. Then the only other thing you have to do once you've got your code checked in is you come over to Visual Studio. Whoops, I'm in the wrong one. Hold on, I need my remote desktop. Oh, it's because I've zoomed out. There we go. I apologize. I'm having remote desktop pains. There we go. And you come over here to the build definition. And you notice I made it a CI build. And what you do is you specify the name of that PowerShell script that's in that folder. In this case, it's a SharePoint app deploy.ps1. So there's a parameters file that you update your own. This file I didn't have to touch. And once you've done that, you kick off a build. And I'm just going to kick it off first to deploy it, because I removed it earlier. And this is really awesome. Once this runs, and this last time it took 113 seconds, so it's going to take a minute and a half. It's going out, it's building it, making it a SharePoint package, pushing it out to my SharePoint site, registering it. If necessary, if it's there, it retracks, redeploys it, and then the only thing you have to do is you trust it, then it'll be available for your users. So we'll give it a few minutes. It's going to take about 90 seconds. Now, I know some of you are saying, well, this is great, Brian. You did some websites and stuff, but I'm curious, what about databases that are more complicated? What about my Click Once app? Well, that's where you have to decide what you want to do. The out-of-the-box stuff is not designed for those more complex environments. So if you want to stick to a pure Microsoft solution, Microsoft told you on Monday what they're going to do about it. They've acquired in-release, and over the next few months, they will bring it into the Microsoft fold and make it available to you if you're a customer in the Team Foundation Service world now, or Team Foundation Server world. They haven't announced pricing, how you're going to get it, what subscription, whatever, but Microsoft has a solution for you. There are third-party solutions out there. Some you can buy, some are free. You can also roll your own. When you want to roll your own, you have to decide, what's the maturity of my organization? If you're very mature, what you'll find, the ALM Rangers have packages that allow you to customize the build template and do deployments from the build, just like we're doing it here. On the other hand, I've had organizations that say, you know what, we want more of the in-release style, but we want our own custom thing. And I did this for 2 customers over the last 3 months. We actually ended up building a custom deployment tool for them to do it just the way they wanted to. We built the thing, we just called it Team Deploy, but what it does is, they basically add an XML configuration file to their solution. That XML configuration file describes their deployment, and it's named the same name as the build. And then all they have to do is come here, pick their build definition, set the status of that build, so for example, ready for deployment, then come over here and pick, when the build was last run. Let's see, it's been a while since I've run one, so let's do 14 days. No, it's been even longer than that. Okay, we'll come down here, it looks like the 21st. You click the deployment, and it goes off and runs. And basically what we did is they said they weren't really into Windows workflow. They didn't want to write custom workflow tasks, and they also had a more formal process to where they wanted to do QA sign-up. They wanted to look at things before they deployed it. So they have a separation of concerns where they build automated, they check it when they're done, then they deploy automated. But there's a disconnect between the actual build stage to deployment. Okay? And this does very similar stuff to what tools like in-release and other third-party products do. So the point is, you have lots of options if it gets more complex. So let's go back over. We should take a look at this. How are we doing here? Oh, look, is it done? Great. We go to View Build Details. So the first thing I do is I go to the app instance. I say Trust It. And then once I've done that, I come back to the Open It. And we'll give it a second. Okay, we'll give it a couple seconds. While it's doing that, we'll come over here and make a change and start a second build. Okay, I'm going to check that in while it's going. Okay, so this is going to kick off that build automatically. So we go back to builds. So you have a green light. We have a second one running. Go back to the website. Looks like SharePoint's waking up. Come on, baby. Yeah, the internet's still there. Oh, come on. All the demos have worked. You can work for me, right? They're starting to talk about you. Well, we'll give it a couple seconds. That other build's running, so they'll do it again. Those will be fun. Let's see where this is at. This is still in the queue. One of the things that's in the queue, if it makes you feel better, you can put it to higher in the queue. Oh, it's too far. Okay. Got ahead. They're cranking away. So it's already on the build agent. Well, it's there. You saw that I was able to trust it, but something with my site is still waking up or whatever. But in either case, you can do continuous deployment now to Office 365. And to be clear, everything I did here would also work using Team Foundation's server and a local team build installation that you then can push up. All right, well, I'll give it a couple seconds and wrap up, and then we'll come back and check to see how it's doing. Actually, let me leave that one up. All right. So remember, the letter C, continuous. It's not just continuous deployment. You don't just get married before you've taken the girl out on a date. You don't just suddenly make all things go better by making deployments automated. You have to feed the deployment pipeline correctly, and it starts with continuous integration. Think about continuous testing and delivering continuous value by getting continuous feedback from your users. It takes a mature organization, a mature development team, and definitely takes maturity on your customer's level to handle updates happening on a daily basis. But just because they can't handle it doesn't mean you have to not be ready to do continuous deployment. So everything we talked about is good. The only thing you can stop is just wait to click that deploy button. Right? Like I said, I have 2 customers that are doing that because they want those extra checkoffs. With in-release that's coming out, you'll see you'll be able to do exactly that. You'll be able to do pure continuous deployment, or you can have that ability to sign off and say, yes, deploy it. The bottom line is we still want to get 3 things: consistent deployments that are repeatable and that is completely automated so that we don't have to have humans messing up things and screwing up and causing pain. Oh, good, it came back. Good. I get to leave on a high note. So there's TechEd NOLA, and if we look back at the build, I'm sure it's still, it's done there. So now let's go back over there, trust it again. And now maybe it's awake that if I click here, it will run a little faster maybe. A little faster. Pretty please with sugar on top. So that's what it said before. Oh, come on. They want to go home. They want to go get ready for the party. By the way, I highly recommend if you're going out tonight, go back to your room, take a nap, and also get packed tonight so that when you get up tomorrow morning, it's mostly about getting clothes on and heading to the airport. Just speaking from experience of being in New Orleans. You guys believe me, right? It worked. In summary, thank you very much for coming. Have a safe trip home, and hopefully I'll see you next year in Houston. Goodbye.